Right, everyone.
I was going to intro you. This is Bishoy.
Sure.
Big round of applause.
Thank you.
Okay.
If you haven't seen me here before, it's about roughly a year now, and I was also talking about APIs, but that last time I was talking about API mocking and testing. But this time it's evolving. So API as a product, it's something that I've been doing recently, a few months ago, with South Australian government digital platform, and something that I've seen tremendous amount of talk about online and in digital disruption talks and presentations and digital strategy. But what does that actually mean, and how do we implement it? So this is why I'm here. In case if you haven't met me before or know about me before, so I'm the founder of Dot Labs. It's my own consulting business that I found about a year ago, and basically we do a lot of stuff about application architecture, about infrastructure, cloud, hybrid, private, DevOps, continuous integration, continuous deployment, and ALM practices. That's where my specialty and where we engage our clients. This presentation contains no buzzwords, no disruption, no JavaScript frameworks. So basically, no bullshit. So have a look at this graph, and this is basically programmable web. Have anyone used programmable web before? It's a website that aggregates APIs. So it's kind of offering APIs to people from vendors. Some of them are free, some of them are commercial, but it's like a directory for APIs that you can discover and use. And this is the growth that they have seen in APIs from 2005 through to 2013. So this is quite old as well. And imagine how that looks now in 2016. Why APIs are important? They're not going anywhere. UI paradigms, UX paradigms, they come and go. Mobile platforms, something new that happened in the last 5-6 years. Web platforms and rich web applications, it's something new. APIs have existed even before some of us have been born. APIs is very old. It's evolving and it's changing, but it existed and it will exist 10 or 20 years from now. The concept itself is stable. Technologies around it are changing. APIs are powering everything we touch and use today that's digital. Internet of Things are driving a lot of the growth in APIs. Basically, your business has an API. Your API services your applications, your devices, your partners, your internal development teams, your end users. Your mobile apps uses APIs. IoT devices uses APIs. Rich web applications uses APIs, whether it be RESTful, whether it be SOAP, whether it be WCF, any other technology. Windows has APIs. It's not web, but it's API. So APIs are everywhere. You don't see it. You don't see a lot of people talking about it, but it's what's powering today's internet. Any of you developing mobile apps? Any of you have been developing big systems, multiple applications with integration? Yeah? Any of you have been developing a platform? Cool stuff. So basically, if you're doing an app or a single system, APIs doesn't really mean much to you, or doesn't really become a problem for you, because it's a layered architecture, one single system, no much integration. It's one single app, one single system. So you don't feel the pain that people go through, especially in bigger systems. Once your app becomes a system with multiple apps and several integrations, you start considering APIs seriously. Once your system or multiple systems becomes a platform that you want to leverage as a growth driver for your business, APIs become crucial. This is something that can make your business live or die. Why is that? Well, let's see. You have a few developers, small team, working on an application, publishing directly to your end customers. Doesn't look like it works on the screen. Publishing directly to your end users through your medias, apps, web, etc. But then how much can you achieve with your small team? Not much really. How can I grow that and deliver more features for my end users and drive growth for my app or my system? You need to bring in the community to help deliver those much needed features. You can fund and you can work on so much in your small team, but the greater community can actually drive much more growth. Netflix, for example, yes, they have delivered apps for probably every device that you can watch movies for, but there is countless other websites and apps that uses the Netflix API to deliver a different experience for the users. For example, I want to link it to Rotten Tomato or whatever that website ratings and kind of filter and build a playlist or whatever. That's a feature that Netflix didn't build for their users, but the community did. They paid nothing to develop that feature. They just built an API. Once your community jumps in and starts adopting your API and you start delivering more value for your customers, the next big thing is to start integrating with other systems and other APIs. So you're bringing in value added for your system, or in some other scenarios, you're giving value added to other systems. You have a flight booking website or API. How about time zone API that can show different meeting, different help business people schedule different meetings across different time zones with your API? How about the hotel booking service that can integrate with your flight booking and offer hotel bookings for the end users as well? So it's a snowball and starts rolling. Your app becomes a platform. Where do I start? How do I build an API that people can and will adopt and use? This is the question. Within that question, there is a lot of concerns. There is a cross-cutting concerns, a list of cross-cutting concerns that you want to discuss. If you're developing one single API, yeah, maybe I can take the pain and develop all these cross-cutting concerns in my API. It's one single API. I will have to do it once. Once you start having 2 APIs, 3 APIs, more, it becomes very expensive to do this more and more and more. You can also use as much, and you need to keep your API platform updated. You need to keep adding features to it. You need to keep updating the documentation, and there is a cost to it. Whether it's security, traffic management, mobile optimization, scalability, how do you handle growth and adoption of your APIs? Do you just hit your backend servers with every single request? You have a caching strategy. Can your legacy APIs handle all these concerns as well as your new APIs? Do you want to expose some of your legacy APIs without some coding effort? So all these concerns are answered by API management. There are a lot of products in the market that does API management, but tonight I'll be talking about Azure API Management. We'll do some hands-on practice as well, and we'll see why I love this particular product. And it fits very well within this group that we're discussing. Azure API Management is relatively new, but it's moving very fast. The 3 main components of Azure API Management is Developer Portal, Gateway, and Publisher Portal. The Gateway is straightforward. This is what actually takes the calls from end users of your API, translates them into the back end, systems that you have and applies whatever configuration or settings that you tell it to do. Publisher portal, this is where you actually configure the API management. How do you want the developer portal to look? What sort of policies and configurations you want? What sort of security concerns you want? Caching. How do I make it actually understand and talk to my backend APIs? This is your publisher portal. Developer portal. Now, my internal teams, if I have multiple teams and some teams are developing APIs, other teams are consuming them, how do I make this documentation effort consistent? How do I drive this documentation from my APIs so that to minimize the amount of effort I need to spend? How do I allow the developers to try and play with my APIs and use them, try before they buy, basically? So kind of interactively work with my APIs to kind of understand them more and start working with them. Same goes for your partners, same goes for your end users or the public. API documentation pretty much is the main driver of adoption. If you want your APIs to be usable to your internal teams or external users, you need to make them appealing, you need to make them understandable, you need to make them available for developers to try. So that's where the developer portal fits. And basically developers, apps, and API publishers each talk to the facade within the API management that fits their need. And API management will talk to your backend systems, be it on the public cloud or in your private organization's infrastructure. It can establish VPN connections to your infrastructure, so secure. Publisher portal. What questions does it answer? What does it contain? Publisher portal basically contains these smaller components. Configure your APIs, your products, your policies, analytics, and security. Your APIs, you can import a WSDL, for example, or a WADL, or a Swagger file, or point it to a URL to import that from, if you are generating that from your code dynamically. And it pretty much, this standard would allow to understand your API operations, URL, etc., parameters, examples, schemas, and it will use this to generate the documentation for you. Products, now, API as a product, you have to have some sort of a product model. Do I offer my APIs for internal developers within my business with the same offering that I am offering to external systems, whether it be business to business or business to consumer? Do I need to do some rate limiting? Do I need to hide and show some APIs based on whether you're a partner or not? So this is the products, where the products fit. So, for example, I can have a starter product, unlimited product, enterprise product, private product, and you can assign APIs to those products. The product itself sets visibility around your APIs and allows you to target specific products with policies. Analytics. Now, in order to make informed decisions about your APIs, you need to understand how they work, where they are being used, and how they are reacting to load, and how they are being used. A lot of variables that you need to monitor for your API to keep on top of its health, to make a decision. Where do I invest next in this API? Is this operation really being used? Is this one being the highest in latency or error rates? There is a lot of things that analytics can help you be more agile about developing your APIs. Security, well, again, how do I allow or deny developers to use my API? How do I secure my backend systems, and how do I authorize people to use this operation or that operation? So again, mostly cross-cutting concerns. You can implement them into any of your APIs. So let's break it down and have a look at each of them. How does that work? Basically, for APIs, you can go and import your API from a URL, from a file, update your API from a Swagger file. Anyone here have used Swagger before? Cool. So it's quite popular. configure URL and mappings. You can rewrite URLs without changing your code. You can hide, show, remove operations within your API to expose it through the gateway. And you can set credentials and authorizations on your API. And you can track issues on client applications that the developers will interact with the developer portal using issues on client applications. There's a very, very simple issue tracker built in. You can use it or you don't have to if you don't want. Now, again, products are assigned to user groups. Which user groups will see which products, something you can configure. You can control subscriptions. So the end result of a product is a developer subscribing to that product and then using your API using his subscription. So the product is just an intermediary here. So you can control if your product requires a subscription, so the developer must subscribe first. Does your product require subscription approval? So an administrator must approve this subscription request first, something you can configure in the product for assigning the APIs to. And you can enforce terms of service. So basically, when they sign up to a subscription, you can show them terms of service and get them to consent that they agree on that. Nobody reads this, right? Policies. Policies is a very cool thing. When you're looking at a lot of the things that you can control in the API management layer, technical will be done in policies. For example, caching, for example, invoking a third-party tool. I want to send a Slack notification, for example, if some API call failed or if error rates are huge, or I want to invoke a third-party system to track my API calls, or I want to override my APIs to hide some classified information, for example. So if your API is a legacy, you don't want to spend time coding or maintaining it, or you can't maintain it for particular reasons, or it's a partner API that you're exposing to your developers, but you don't want them to use certain things, so you can expose it and hide this information through policies. There are a lot of things that you can do with policies. How does policies work? They are scoped. So you can apply policies to certain operations or APIs or products or globally, and they will inherit each other at these layers or levels. They're XML documents, but very, very simple structure. So they have a split between inbound, backend, and outbound. And you apply your policies to the request as it's coming to the inbound, to the gateway, or as the request is leaving the gateway to go to your backend, or as the request is being sent back from the gateway to the client. And you can write C# expressions within that XML document to do some cool stuff. I'll show you. And there is some context provided for your code that you can use. For example, what is the request headers, what are the cookies, what are the response code. This is something that is a very simple policy. For example, here I'm choosing that if a condition is met to convert something from JSON to XML, and I'm not writing any code here except for the condition, for example. So I'm checking whether the context request header have an accept application XML, and then I'm telling the API management to convert the JSON to XML, always apply it, and don't consider other headers. And if I put this into my inbound rule on a certain API, I can pretty much enforce it to talk back to the client in XML, even though my API does not understand XML. It will translate JSON to XML and send it to my backend service, or translate it back to the client. Very cool. Here's another example, but with more code, for example. So I'm logging here. It's a log to Event Hub, and it's a built-in policy. I am logging my request metadata to an Event Hub that I can analyze later, for example, put it in a data warehouse and do some cool Power BI dashboard to show me my requests coming from which IP address the most, or which service name is being utilized the most, or by time. So this is basically just concatenating this metadata into a CSV-like string, sending it to an Event Hub. What do I get with analytics, the built-in stuff? You get usage, health, and activity. That's the basic things. and it has a retention of 90 days for the information. If you need to keep your information for more than that, you probably need to log somewhere like the Event Hub. This is, for example, what the usage looks like in the dashboard. You can filter and you can drill down, and you can see some sort of like a global map with your API clients. So you can, for example, if my API is being used in the States more than the Australian, then that's probably the time that I need to deploy a redundant instance into the US to minimize latency or something like that. Security, lots of things to do, but basically identity authentication authorization. This is the very basic stuff that API management is trying to do for you as well. Identity, it's providing you a directory that can allow developers to sign up and create accounts, allows you to get developers to sign up or sign in with social identity or other identity providers as well. So it can be an identity broker, not just an identity provider. Authentication allows you to configure an authentication mechanism between your API gateway and your backend. So if you want to restrict access to your backend APIs, even though they are deployed publicly, you can configure something like that in the API management to send a basic authentication token or a client certificate that your backend identifies and knows, shared secrets. And you can configure authorization. So if your API uses OAuth 2, the interactive part of the developer portal will require some sort of an authentication mechanism to give a token to the developer to use the API. So you can configure that there. The identity provider within API management is built on top of Azure Active Directory B2C. Anyone have used that before? Yeah. It's a special version of Azure Active Directory. B2C is business to consumer, so it's not focused on internal users, but rather on external users to your organization. So it allows integration with social identity providers such as Facebook, Twitter, Google Identity, LinkedIn, or custom identity providers beside the built-in username and password store. So that's built into the identity broker provider within API gateway. You get that within API management. Or if you're not satisfied, you have your own identity provider, you can just do delegation. Delegation is that you configure an endpoint with a specific parameters and a specific schema, and API management will give you all the sign up and sign in requests to that endpoint, and you can say, yes, I know that person, that developer who's trying to use my API, or yes, let's sign up that developer and sign it successfully. Happen, or if you want to do some monetization, as of now, there is no monetization built-in feature within API management, although I know that it's in the works. No kind of visibility when that's coming through. But I would say it's coming very soon and very fast. The team is actively developing the platform. But if you want to do your own monetization as of now, you probably will have to do some delegation work.
Excuse me. So here, if I want to use any social identity providers with API management, where do I need to integrate that with ACS, Access Control Service, in the?
Well, the delegation has a specific scheme and a specific endpoint that you have to build. So maybe you'll have to introduce something intermediary between your ACS and API management to translate.
Yeah.
But they have extensive documentation on how to do that.
But there's no any direct link, right? And we have to write some code in between, right?
Well, yeah, they can't possibly target every single identity provider and access control service out there, but they give you a specific scheme, and I'm hoping that this is not a very tough practice to do this integration. It should be fairly small if you're just translating the calls into your end system and not handling them yourself. So let me show you how that looks in reality. So here's my Azure portal. So far, it's still in the classic portal, and I know that they're working on getting that experience across to the new Azure portal. But that's my instance. I just save you the time to provision this within a few minutes. And let's see. This is my publisher portal, and by default, I have a demo API called Echo API here. If you create a new API management tenant, you get that by default. And
Can you zoom in, please?
yes. So this is where my configuration goes. So here are my APIs, and if I drill down into one of those APIs, you'll always get relevant information about your API health, and you can go straight to configuration. And that's the actual backend URL for my API. And I'm telling API management to just use HTTPS to communicate my API. Don't go HTTP. And this is my URL suffix. So if you go to API management, my tenant here, this is the suffix that will be used to call this particular API. You can have multiple APIs, and each of them will have a unique suffix. Operations. Now, this API have been imported from a Swagger file, and this is what the API management have discovered about my API. And drilling down, you'll get to see verb, template, straightforward. So this is a mapping of the Swagger information, Swagger template information. You can also enable caching. This is the easy way to enable caching in your particular operations one by one, but there is another advanced way of doing it through policies as well. And here's your documentation about parameters, about body, possible responses, and all the information that you put here will be used to generate your developer portal documentation for your API. Security, how does the API management communicate with your backend? And you pretty much have two options here as of now, client certificate or basic authentication. And we have two options about user authorization. So OAuth2 and OpenID Connect, issue tracker, and the assigned products to my API. So again, the default products within a new API management tenant are the starter and unlimited, and you can add any more products that you like. If I explore products very quickly, again, these are my products. I can add a new product that requires subscriptions or not, typical configuration, and then this is the very cool stuff, policies. So again, as I said, policies are inherited from each other and they are scoped. So for example, I can have a policy for a particular product, and if you see, this is for the starter product on all APIs and all operations, and see there's a rate limit of 5 calls every 60 seconds. How does that look? Let me show you. I'm pretty sure this is very familiar. If not, just let me know. So this is me calling the resource endpoint on the starter product, and I'm saying the starter product because I'm using a subscription key. You'll get to see that later on. How did I get that information? And I have a 200 OK, and I have a few headers. If you have noticed, this is me enabling API management to trace my operation. And I'm getting API management trace location. Let me show you how that looks, actually. So as a developer, this is very helpful to understand how my API works, and if it breaks, where did it actually break? So this is a JSON trace of my API, and you'll see that the API inspector, even the time it's taken to execute each policy. So you'll see that we have 3 areas here of policies: inbound, backend, outbound. So mapped one-to-one to my policies. And within each policy, this is the rate limit policy, and this is the time it's taken, and this is the incrementing of the rate happening. So what happens if I kept calling my API? Oh, too many requests. So my backend hasn't been invoked within that. The API management is enforcing these policies, and I am conserving my resources. Let me show you one thing more about policies, for example. So I have another policy configured on a global scope here, which is about sending something to Slack if an error happened. And if I change this to be, because I'm not getting any 200, I'm not getting any 500 errors in this API, so I make it 200, and hopefully my Slack is here. Yeah, it's happening. So this is API management calling my Slack channel, telling me that there's something going on in my API. So that's, again, API management doing that integration. It's the same thing as sending to Slack. It's possibly the same if you want to have a webhook into some other system to do some other logic. There is a way to send asynchronous fire and forget or synchronous requests within your policies. So there is different ways of integrating into other systems that may not be exposing APIs in particular. Or for example, if you want to invoke an Azure function or a serverless architecture, this is a good way to do that. Or a logic app. Analytics, it is what you expect. Here you can understand your products, top subscriptions, top APIs, operations, and it's split across usage, health, and activity. And your retention is 90 days, obviously. And users and groups, and you can create new users or approve user signups with the pending verifications, introduce more granular groups like partners, for example. It's not just developers. And configure notifications. If you want to get API management to send you an email for some important things happening, a developer raises an issue, for example, similar. Your security layer. API management has a REST API that you can do pretty much anything that I'm doing here in the portal. You can use the REST API to do, or alternatively, you can use the Git repository if you are a developer and you're crazy about Git. So you can check out the Git repository of API management configuration, do your changes, commit, and you keep a history of your changes, basically. That's a big benefit, and that's the recommended way of doing it in production. Or you can configure identity provider here as well. So again, Azure Active Directory, Facebook login, or other social accounts. Upload your client certificates to secure communication between the gateway and the API backend, or configure delegation, or configure other authorization providers. So pretty much this is the publisher portal capabilities as of today. It will keep growing. I've seen it growing. I've been watching for the last 6 months, and I can tell you there's a lot of things that are changing every day. What about the developer portal? Where does it come to play within this product? So with the developer portal, you get the documentation, you get the users or developers to sign up to use your APIs, you get them to publish and create apps and tell you about their apps that they have published, so that you have information about who's using your API. You can promote it within the developer portal or do something else about it. And there is also the issue tracker. This is how it looks inside the developer portal. So it's very similar to a Swagger generated documentation, with the exception that this is not just a documentation. You can pretty much try the API with an integration to authentication providers that you've set in the publisher portal. And you can generate some code samples to use your APIs, make your developers' life easier, they will love you more. And you can navigate other stuff as well. So this portal is actually a content management system. So you have control over theming, the structure of the navigation, widgets, the content within each widget is pretty much configurable within the developer portal. So you don't have to spend time setting up yours and maintaining it manually. So again, you get to try the API, you get to generate code to use your API. And let me show you my developer portal. So this is the basic look and feel. This is the My Welcome page, and if I'm logged in as an administrator, I'll see this little customization thing that I can customize the styles of the portal, or customize the templates of each component. And you get this little nice red HTML editor to edit and change how the HTML is generated for your content. If you are just like me and happy with the defaults, you can drill down straight into the APIs, and you can even download the Swagger definition of your API, but with the changes that it's now pointing to the API management portal. And we can go and try one of these APIs. And when I go and try, it's telling me what kind of headers do I want to include. It gives me the example body by default, and which subscription that I want to use. And here's the request that will be sent. And here's the response that I got back from the server. So if you see this, you also can see the trace, since we told API management to trace this call, and you can debug your call, see what's happening behind the scenes. So that's the core part of it. These are my products that I can subscribe to, and if I drilled into a product, I can see that I have subscriptions, and I can manage my subscriptions inside the developer portal as well as a developer, or register one of my applications to be sent back to the API vendors, or I can raise issues in one of the APIs if I'm using it. So again, now it's a very simple experience, but you have the power and the control to make it a great place for your developers to start learning about your APIs and using it. And if I can take you back to the publisher portal, there's a bunch of stuff as well about configuring the developer portal experience. So you can manage the applications published, approve them. You can manage the content published on the developer portal. Again, as I said, this is the content management system part of it. Widgets, navigation, and settings. So now, my last conclusions that I'll love to share with you. Why should I use it? Where does it fall short? It is still a relatively new product. It comes with some rough edges that you'll have to smooth out, like, for example, integrating with other identity providers, delegation. There's some missing stuff like monetization that's needed by the community, and the versioning strategy is pretty much up to you about your APIs, although you can do it with the simplest URL stuff, for example. What do I get from it right now, this moment? Cross-cutting concerns answered, done, without you spending the time and effort doing it. It will cost you much less than your team's effort to do this, especially if you have more than one API. It's very easy to use and customize. It's very familiar for a .NET developer. It's the same code you will use to write the policies. It will take you no time to adapt and get up to speed with. And it's already part of Azure if you're using Azure infrastructure, so it makes sense. It's part of the ecosystem. Where is that product heading? You can actually go and see the API product roadmap. It's publicly published. This is what the product team in Redmond is working on. What are they releasing next? And what are they working on now? Any questions?